Parents refused to help with my college. Now they expect me to loan them money. All right, here goes nothing. So my name's Kevin, I'm 32, and I work as a mechanic. It's not a fancy job, but it pays the bills, and I actually enjoy it. You get to see stuff getting fixed, and I like the feeling of solving a problem. Plus, owning my own little garage now means I don't have to answer to some clueless manager. Anyway, that's not the point here. The point is, my family is kind of a mess, and my sister Amy is a huge part of that. Let me give you a bit of background. Growing up, my family wasn't poor, but we weren't well off either. My mom, Janice, worked at a local diner, and my dad, Rick, is a truck driver. Nothing glamorous. They worked hard, but there was never a ton of extra cash lying around. My parents were practical, which is why what happened with Amy still blows my mind. So Amy is my younger sister by about 3 years. She's always been the golden child. You know, the type who got everything handed to her on a silver platter while I was expected to figure things out on my own, and she never worked for anything in her life. Growing up, it was like she could do no wrong. If she wanted something, my parents would bend over backward to make it happen. But if I wanted anything, I had to work for it or forget about it. I'm not going to lie, I've always been a bit resentful about that. I mean, how could I not be? There I was, busting my ass mowing lawns, working odd jobs, and doing whatever I could to save up for things, while Amy was getting handed money to go shopping with her friends or whatever. My parents acted like it was no big deal, but trust me, it got under my skin. Anyway, fast forward a bit to when I was about 27. I'd finally saved up enough to buy my first house. Nothing fancy, just a little two-bedroom fixer-upper on the edge of town. It wasn't in the best neighborhood, but it was mine, you know? I spent months fixing it up. Paint, new floors, redoing the kitchen, the whole thing. I was proud of it. I mean, it was the first time in my life I really felt like I'd accomplished something big on my own. So naturally, I decided to host Thanksgiving that year. I figured it'd be a good way to show off my hard work to my family. So I invited my parents, and even though I knew it'd be a pain, I invited Amy too. She'd been dating this real estate guy, John, for about a year at that point. This guy was loaded, or at least that's what Amy kept bragging about. Fancy car, nice clothes, living in some luxury condo downtown. Whatever. I didn't care about his money. Good for him, I guess. But what I didn't expect was how Amy and John were going to act at Thanksgiving. The day comes, and I've been cooking all day, cleaning the house, making sure everything's perfect. My parents show up, and everything's going smoothly. We're talking, catching up, eating appetizers, you know, normal stuff. Then Amy and John roll up. Now, right off the bat, Amy comes in with this attitude like she's better than everyone else. She walks around the house looking at everything like she's inspecting it. I tried to let it go, but I could feel my blood starting to boil. She starts making these little comments about how small the house is, how old-fashioned the decor looks, and how the neighborhood isn't exactly safe. She doesn't stop there, though. She goes on and on about how John's condo is huge, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city, and some fancy security system. I kept my mouth shut, but I was seething inside. Like, seriously? Who comes to someone's house for Thanksgiving and spends the whole time criticizing it? My parents didn't say anything, of course. They just sat there, probably thinking, oh, that's just Amy. I could feel my patience slipping away, but I was trying to be the bigger person, you know? I didn't want to cause a scene. But then she crossed the line. She starts talking about how John pays for everything, how lucky she is to be with him, and how she'd never have to live in a place like mine. Like, really rubbing it in my face. That's when I lost it. I looked at her and said, at least I bought this house with my own money. I worked for it. I didn't need our parents to pay for anything. And I definitely didn't need to rely on someone else's paycheck to get it. Can you say the same? Amy's face went red, and I could tell I'd hit a nerve. John, who had been pretty quiet up until that point, gave me this annoyed look. But he didn't say anything. My parents just sat there, awkward as hell, like they had no idea what to do. I didn't care anymore. I was pissed. Then I told her, if you think you're too good for my place, you can show yourself the door. No one's keeping you here. And that was it. She and John stormed out without saying another word. My parents tried to calm me down afterward, saying things like, she didn't mean it, and you know how she is. But I wasn't having it. I'd had enough. I told them I wasn't going to keep putting up with her crap just because she's family. From that moment on, Amy and I stopped talking. I haven't seen her since that day, and honestly, I'm fine with it. My life's been a lot less stressful without her in it. My parents, though, they've never stopped trying to get us to make up. Every once in a while, they'll bring her up saying stuff like, family's family, or you two should let bygones be bygones. But I'm not interested. Amy's always been a spoiled, entitled brat, and nothing's changed. So yeah, that's how it all went down. My sister hasn't spoken to me in 5 years because I finally stood up to her. And honestly, I don't miss her. She was always a source of stress, and my life's better without her drama. All right, so here we are, 5 years after that whole Thanksgiving disaster. Things have been pretty quiet between Amy and me. Honestly, I thought it'd just stay that way, and I was totally fine with it. No drama, no stress. But of course, nothing ever stays simple for long when family's involved. A couple of weeks ago, my mom calls me up out of the blue. I hadn't heard from her in a little while, which wasn't unusual. We'd been on decent terms since the whole Amy thing went down, but we didn't talk every day or anything. Anyway, she calls, and the first thing she says is, "Kevin, we need to talk." Now, when someone says that, it's never good, right? My mind starts racing, thinking maybe something bad happened with Dad's health or something. But nope, it's not that. Instead, she drops this bombshell on me. Amy's getting married to that same guy, John, from 5 years ago, the guy who was with her during that Thanksgiving nightmare. I'll be honest, my first reaction wasn't great. I just kind of sighed and said, "Oh, okay," because, well, what else was I supposed to say? It's not like I care about Amy's relationship status anymore, but I figured that's where the conversation would end. Nope. Mom starts going on about how Amy's wedding is this huge deal and how it's going to be really fancy. She's talking about venues, flowers, the whole 9 yards. And of course, she's excited. My parents have always been way more invested in Amy's life than mine. It's just the way things have always been. But then, she says something that makes me pause. "We've promised Amy that we'll cover the cost of the venue and decorations," Mom says. "But Kevin, we're going to need a little help." I had to do a double take at that. "Wait, what? You need help with what?" I ask, feeling a little confused. "We need you to help us cover the costs," she says, as if this is just a normal thing to ask. I'm not going to lie. I was floored. I didn't even know what to say at first. My parents wanted me to give them money for Amy's wedding, the same Amy I haven't spoken to in 5 years, the same Amy who made my life miserable for most of our childhood, the same Amy who walked out of my house without so much as an apology that Thanksgiving. It felt like I was living in some alternate reality where none of that mattered. I mean, come on. They seriously expected me to help pay for her wedding? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Mom, why would you even think I'd want to do that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, even though I was already starting to get worked up. Mom seemed genuinely surprised. "Kevin, it's your sister. Family helps family." That's when I snapped. I told her exactly what I thought. Family helps family? Really? Where was that energy when I needed help paying for trade school? You guys didn't lift a finger back then? But now you want me to hand over money for Amy's wedding? The same Amy I don't even speak to? Mom got real quiet after that, probably because she didn't have a good answer. I didn't stop there, though. I reminded her about all the times Amy got whatever she wanted while I had to fend for myself, how they let her walk all over me for years, and now they're asking me for money like none of that ever happened. After a minute, Mom finally said, "It's different, Kevin. We didn't have the money back then." I just laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how ridiculous it sounded. "And you think I have money to just throw at Amy's wedding now? Do you even hear yourself? I'm not giving you a single dime for this. If you can't afford it, you shouldn't have promised it." Mom got defensive after that, saying they didn't want Amy to feel like they couldn't support her, especially in front of John's wealthy family. Apparently, they've been trying to keep up with his parents, who are loaded and throwing money at the wedding left and right. My parents wanted to contribute so they didn't look like they were falling behind. It was all just so shallow. I mean, who cares if John's family has more money? It doesn't change the fact that Amy's spoiled and entitled. But my parents were so wrapped up in this image they wanted to present that they were willing to beg me for money just to keep up appearances. I told Mom I wasn't going to help, that it wasn't my responsibility, and I didn't even care about the wedding. She tried to guilt trip me, saying how this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and how it would mean a lot to the family if I pitched in. But I wasn't budging. I told her straight up that she needed to figure this out without me. She sounded disappointed, but I wasn't backing down. We ended the call on a pretty awkward note, with her telling me she'd talk to Dad and figure out another way. The whole thing just left me feeling drained. I couldn't believe the nerve they had to even ask me for money after all these years, especially for Amy, of all people. It just brought back all the resentment I thought I'd buried after that Thanksgiving fight. The way my parents have always bent over backward for Amy, while I've had to figure everything out on my own. It's like nothing's changed. Over the next few days, I tried to forget about it, but it kept eating at me. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted. I mean, it was my parents asking for help, and I've always been the kind of person who tries to do right by them, even when they frustrate me. But this felt different. It felt like they were crossing a line. I was still stewing over the whole thing when my dad called me a week later. Now my dad doesn't usually call unless it's something important, so I picked up right away. He cut straight to the point. Your mom told me you won't help with Amy's wedding, he said. No hello, no small talk, just straight into it. Yeah, that's right, I said, feeling my stomach tighten. I could already tell this conversation wasn't going to go well. Dad let out a long sigh. Kevin, we really need you to help us out here. We've already committed to paying for part of it, and now we're stuck. If we don't come through, it's going to look bad. There it was again, this obsession with how things looked. It wasn't even about Amy anymore. It was about saving face in front of John's family. I could feel the anger bubbling up again. Look, Dad, I said, trying to stay calm. I'm not responsible for the promises you made. If you can't afford it, then you shouldn't have offered to pay. I'm not going to bail you out. Dad didn't like that. He started going on about how families should stick together and how they've always done their best for us. But the more he talked, the more I realized something. They weren't asking for my help because they needed it. They were asking because they expected it, like it was my duty to clean up their mess. So I cut him off. I'm sorry, Dad, but I'm not doing it. You'll have to figure something else out. And that was it. The conversation ended on a sour note, just like the one with my mom. They weren't happy with me, but for once I didn't feel guilty. I'd spent my whole life trying to keep the peace, but this time I wasn't going to let them push me around. All right, so after that conversation with my dad, I thought things would settle down. I'd made my stance pretty clear, and I figured they'd just leave it alone. I mean, what else could they do, right? But of course, that's not how my family works. It never is. A few days later, I get this message from my cousin Mark. Now, Mark's one of the few relatives I actually get along with. He's not into the whole drama thing, and we've always been on good terms. So when he texts me saying, "Hey, can we talk?" I figured it was something casual, maybe just catching up or whatever. But when we got on the phone, it was pretty clear that wasn't the case. Kev, man, what's going on with your folks? He asked, not even bothering with the usual small talk. What do you mean? I replied, already feeling a knot form in my stomach. I had a feeling I knew where this was headed, but I wasn't about to jump to conclusions. Mark sighed. I just talked to your mom, and she was like, really upset. She said something about how you refused to help with Amy's wedding, and now the whole family's talking about it. And there it was. The thing I'd been dreading. I didn't think my parents would actually start spreading this around to the rest of the family, but I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. They'd done it before, especially when they wanted to paint themselves as the victims. This was just their style. Go around telling everyone their version of the story, leaving out all the important details that might make people see things differently. I tried to stay calm as I explained the situation to Mark. Yeah, they asked me to help pay for the wedding, and I told them no. I mean, I don't even talk to Amy, so why would I shell out money for her big day? It doesn't make sense. Mark listened quietly, and when I finished, he just said, Man, I get it, I really do. But you know how your parents are. They're making it sound like you're the one causing problems, and now the whole family's talking about it. It's getting kind of messy. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my parents and me anymore. They dragged the entire family into this, and now I was being painted as the bad guy. I could feel the frustration bubbling up, but I didn't want to take it out on Mark. He wasn't the one stirring the pot. He was just giving me a heads up. Great, I muttered, rubbing my temples. So now everyone thinks I'm some selfish jerk, huh? Mark hesitated for a second before answering. Well, yeah, kinda. But it's not like people know the whole story, Kev. They're only hearing what your folks are saying. And you know how they like to spin things. I laughed bitterly. Yeah, I know exactly how they like to spin things. After I got off the phone with Mark, I was pissed. I mean, it's one thing to have a disagreement with your parents, but to have them go around telling everyone in the family, twisting the story to make you look bad, that's a whole new level of low. I wasn't about to sit back and let them trash my name without setting the record straight. So I did something I wasn't sure I'd regret or not. I sent out a group text to the family. You know, the kind of message you think twice about before hitting send, but still do it anyway because you're just that fed up. Yeah, that kind. It wasn't anything crazy, but I laid out the situation as clearly as I could. Hey, just wanted to clear some things up since I've heard a lot of talk going around. Yes, Mom and Dad asked me to help pay for Amy's wedding. No, I'm not helping. I haven't spoken to Amy in years, and it doesn't make sense for me to pay for something I'm not involved in. I didn't start this drama, but I'm not going to be guilt-tripped into doing something I'm not comfortable with. Thanks. Short, to the point, and hopefully enough to stop people from assuming the worst about me. I didn't expect anyone to respond, honestly. I just wanted to get my side out there before the gossip got any worse. But of course, things didn't exactly go the way I planned. Within minutes, my phone started blowing up. I got a text from my aunt, a call from my grandma, and even a message from some cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them were polite enough, asking if everything was okay or offering their support, which felt more like thinly veiled nosiness. But then there were the not-so-nice ones. My Uncle Gary, who's always been way too invested in family business, sent me this long-winded text about how family comes first and how I was being petty by holding on to old grudges. He went on about how Mom and Dad were only trying to do right by Amy and how I should help out for the sake of the family. It was infuriating, but I decided not to respond. Engaging with people like Gary would only make things worse. Then my mom called. I could hear it in her voice. She was pissed. Kevin, what the hell is going on? Why are you sending messages to the whole family? Because, Mom, you've been going around telling everyone I'm refusing to help and making me look bad. I'm just clearing the air, I said, trying to keep my cool. I didn't say anything that wasn't true, she snapped back. You are refusing to help, and now everyone's upset because they don't understand why you're being so selfish. Selfish? You've got to be kidding me, Mom. I'm not paying for a wedding I'm not even involved in. That's not selfish. That's just common sense, I shot back. Mom huffed into the phone. You don't understand, Kevin. We're trying to make sure Amy has the wedding she deserves, and now everyone thinks we can't handle it. That's not my problem, Mom. You're the ones who promised her all this stuff. If you can't afford it, then you shouldn't have made those promises. Don't drag me into it. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to her. But then she hit me with this. You're turning your back on family, Kevin, and one day, you're going to regret it. I didn't even know how to respond to that. I was just tired. Tired of the guilt trips, tired of the manipulation, tired of always being the one expected to clean up everyone else's mess. So I just said, I'm sorry you feel that way, Mom, and hung up. For the rest of the night, I just sat there staring at my phone as the notifications kept rolling in. I wasn't about to engage in more back and forth with my family, but I couldn't help but feel angry about how everything had blown up, all because I didn't want to fork over money for a wedding I wasn't even a part of. By the time I went to bed, I realized something. This whole situation wasn't just about money. It wasn't about the wedding, or Amy, or even my parents, really. It was about control. My family had always expected me to fall in line, to play along, to be the good son who never rocked the boat. And this time, I didn't. And maybe that's why they were so mad. Not because I wouldn't pay for the wedding, but because I finally said no. After that whole mess with the family texts and the phone call from my mom, I thought things would die down. I had made my point, and I didn't really care if people were upset with me anymore. I wasn't about to keep fighting over something that, in my mind, was pretty simple. I wasn't paying for my sister's wedding. End of story. But, like everything with my family, it didn't just end there. A few days after the last call, I get a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was probably just a delivery or something. But when I opened the door, I was pretty shocked to see my dad standing there. Now let me tell you, my dad doesn't just show up out of the blue like that. In fact, I don't think he's ever visited my place without calling first, so right away I knew something was up. Hey Kev, he said, looking a little awkward. Can we talk? I didn't know what to say at first, but I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. I wasn't in the mood for another argument, but it didn't seem like I had much of a choice. He walked in, kind of glancing around the living room like he hadn't seen it before, even though he had. It felt tense, like neither of us knew how to start this conversation. So, what's going on? I finally asked, figuring I'd let him make the first move. Dad sighed and sat down on the couch. I just wanted to clear the air, he said. Things have gotten pretty out of hand and your mom's really upset. I sat down across from him, not really sure where this was going, but ready to defend myself if it turned into another guilt trip. Yeah, I've noticed, I said. But I don't know what you want me to do about it. I've already explained where I stand. I know, Dad said, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to find the right words. But this whole thing with Amy's wedding, it's gotten bigger than it should have been. We didn't expect you to pay for everything, Kev. We were just hoping you could help out a little, as family. There it was again. Family. That magic word they always throw out when they want me to bend. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel that frustration bubbling up again. Dad, I've already said no. I don't have anything against you or Mom, but this is Amy's wedding. Amy, who I haven't spoken to in 5 years. It doesn't make sense for me to pitch in when I'm not even involved in her life. Dad nodded, but I could tell he wasn't really getting it. I get that, Kev, I do. But your mom, she's really struggling with all this. We promised Amy we'd help, and now it's turning into a mess. We don't want to look like we're falling short, especially with John's parents paying for everything. That's when I realized what this was really about. It wasn't about helping Amy or even the wedding itself. It was about appearances. They were more worried about how they looked compared to John's family than they were about the actual situation. They didn't want to seem like they couldn't handle it. I understand that, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But that's on you guys. You promised her. I didn't. You didn't ask me before making those promises, and now you want me to bail you out because it's gotten too expensive. I'm sorry, but that's not my problem. Dad leaned back, running a hand over his face. He looked tired, like the whole situation was wearing him down. You're right. We probably bit off more than we could chew, he admitted, but we didn't want Amy to feel like we weren't supporting her. I let out a breath, trying to be patient. And I get that. I really do. But you guys have always supported Amy. You've done more for her than you ever did for me. And I'm not saying that to be bitter, but it's the truth. So now, when you come to me, expecting me to help with something I'm not even involved in, it just feels wrong. Dad was quiet for a minute, and for the first time, it seemed like he might actually be listening. I guess we didn't see it that way, he said slowly. We just thought, well, maybe if you helped, it would start to mend things between you and Amy. I almost laughed at that. Mend things between Amy and me? As if throwing money at her wedding was going to magically fix 5 years of silence and resentment. Dad, money's not going to fix that, I said. Amy and I have our issues, and they go way deeper than this wedding. You can't just slap a Band-Aid on it with a check. He sighed again, nodding like he understood, but still not really getting it. I guess you're right, he said, sounding defeated. I just don't know how to make all this better. Your mom's really upset, and it's making everything harder. That was the thing about my dad. He wasn't a bad guy, but he always tried to fix everything for everyone, even when it wasn't his responsibility. And in doing that, he'd end up dragging himself into more stress than he needed. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Dad, I'm not trying to make things harder for you guys, but I'm not going to pay for Amy's wedding. I'm not. It's just not my responsibility. And you and Mom need to stop acting like it is. He nodded, looking down at the floor. All right, Kev. I hear you. We'll figure something out. For the first time in this whole mess, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to accept that I wasn't going to cave, that I wasn't going to swoop in and save the day with my wallet. It felt good to finally stand my ground and have him at least acknowledge it, even if I knew my mom wasn't going to be as easy to convince. Dad stayed for a little while longer, and we talked about other stuff, work, life, anything that wasn't wedding related. It was nice to just have a normal conversation with him, something we didn't do often enough. But eventually he had to leave, and as he stood up to go, he gave me this look like he wanted to say more but didn't know how. Take care of yourself, Kev, he said, giving me a pat on the shoulder before heading out the door. You too, Dad, I replied, watching him walk down the steps. As I closed the door behind him, I felt this weird mix of relief and frustration. I was glad we'd talked, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. My mom was still fuming, Amy was still getting married, and the family drama wasn't going to disappear overnight. But at least for now, I'd said my piece. I wasn't backing down. And honestly, that felt pretty damn good. All right, so after that talk with my dad, I thought for a second that maybe things would finally settle down. He seemed to understand where I was coming from, or at least he was willing to leave it alone for a bit. But I should have known better. When it comes to my family, things are never that simple. A few days passed, and things were quiet, too quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. At first, it was kind of a relief. I thought maybe they were finally backing off, giving me some space to breathe. But then, the silence started to feel off. You know that feeling when you just know something's brewing, but you don't know what? Yeah, that. And of course, I was right. One evening, I'm sitting at home after work, just relaxing, when my phone buzzes. It's a text from my Aunt Janet. Now, Aunt Janet is one of those relatives who's always involved in everyone's business. She's never really picked sides before, but she loves to stir the pot and act like she's the mediator in the family. So when I saw her name pop up, I already knew this wasn't going to be good. Her message said something like, "Hey Kevin, I've been hearing a lot about what's going on with the family. I think we should talk." I sighed, debating whether or not to even respond. But then I figured, what the hell, I might as well hear her out. Maybe she had some perspective I hadn't considered. Spoiler alert, she didn't. I called her, and right from the start it was clear where this conversation was headed. "Kevin, honey, I just want to understand why you're being so stubborn about this whole wedding thing," she said. her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she always uses when she's about to lay into someone. I mean, it's your sister's wedding. Don't you think you could just help out a little? For the sake of the family? There it was again. That same phrase. For the sake of the family. Like that was supposed to be the magic word that made me open my wallet and forget all the crap I'd been through. I've already explained this to Mom and Dad, I said, trying to stay calm even though I could feel my patience thinning. I don't have a relationship with Amy. We haven't spoken in 5 years, Janet. I'm not going to help pay for a wedding when I'm not even part of her life. Aunt Janet sighed like she was talking to a toddler who just couldn't understand simple logic. But Kevin, family is family. You don't have to be best friends with Amy to do something nice for her. Weddings are a big deal. It's one of those events where everyone comes together. It could be a chance for you two to reconnect. I almost laughed at that. Reconnect? After 5 years of nothing? And I was supposed to do that by throwing money at her wedding? It sounded ridiculous. I'm sorry, but that's not going to happen, I said, keeping my voice steady. Amy and I aren't going to magically fix things just because I help pay for her wedding. It doesn't work like that, and I'm not going to pretend like everything's fine between us when it's not. Janet was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she was starting to get it. But then she hit me with, "You're being really selfish, Kevin." That word, selfish. I'd heard it so many times over the last few weeks, and every time I heard it, it made my blood boil. Selfish? For not wanting to be dragged into a situation that had nothing to do with me? For standing up for myself after years of being overlooked and ignored? How am I being selfish? I asked, my voice sharper now. I've done nothing but try to keep the peace in this family for years. I've stayed quiet, I've stayed out of the drama, and now when I finally say no to something, I'm the selfish one? Aunt Janet clicked her tongue, clearly not impressed with my little rant. You're not seeing the bigger picture, Kevin. This is about more than just you and Amy. It's about the family. Your parents are heartbroken over this. They just want everyone to come together. And I'm the one who's supposed to make that happen by giving them money? I shot back. Come on, Janet, you know that's ridiculous. She sighed again, this time sounding more annoyed than sweet. Look, I'm just trying to help. I think you're making a big deal out of nothing, but if you're set on this, fine. Just know that you're making things harder for everyone. I didn't even know what to say to that. There was no winning here. No matter how many times I explained myself, it was never enough. I was always the bad guy in their eyes, the one causing problems. All right, Janet, I said, tired of the whole conversation. Thanks for the talk. Before she could respond, I hung up the phone. I didn't have the energy for it anymore. As I sat there, staring at my phone, I couldn't help but feel angry. Angry at my parents for dragging the family into this. Angry at my relatives for making me out to be the villain. And honestly, a little angry at myself for even caring about what they thought. I knew I was right to say no, but the constant pressure was starting to wear on me. The next day, I went to work like usual, trying to push the family drama out of my mind. But it was harder than I thought. Every time I checked my phone, there was another message from someone in the family, cousins, uncles, even a few people I hadn't spoken to in years, all chiming in with their opinions on the situation. By lunchtime, I'd had enough. I turned off my phone and shoved it into my toolbox, deciding to just focus on the cars in front of me and forget about the rest. At least at the garage, things made sense. You fix something, it works. Simple. None of this emotional mess that came with family. When I got home that night, I hesitated before turning my phone back on. Part of me didn't even want to deal with whatever new messages had come through. But of course, curiosity got the better of me. There were a few more texts from family, but one stood out, a message from Amy. Now, this was the last thing I expected. I hadn't spoken to her in 5 years, and suddenly there was a message from her, sitting right there on my screen. I didn't know whether to open it or ignore it. Part of me thought it might just be another guilt trip, or maybe even worse, some kind of demand for money directly from her. But after a minute of staring at the notification, I decided to open it. Her message was short, too short for how long we hadn't spoken. Can we talk? That's all it said. No apology, no explanation, just those 3 words. I didn't know what to make of it. On one hand, I was curious. On the other, I was wary. Why now, after all this time, was she reaching out? Was it because of the wedding? Because I'd refused to pay? Or was it something else entirely? I sat there, staring at the screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard as I tried to figure out what to say. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to avoid whatever new drama this was about to stir up. But another part of me, maybe the part that still cared, even just a little, wanted to hear her out. After a long pause, I typed a reply. Sure. And just like that, the door I thought I'd closed for good creaked open a little bit. So, after I sent that sure text to Amy, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen next. I mean, it had been 5 years, and we hadn't exchanged a single word during all that time. Now, all of a sudden, she wants to talk? It felt off, like there had to be something more behind it. But I didn't know what to expect, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. A couple of hours went by, and I started thinking maybe she wasn't actually going to respond. Maybe she just wanted to feel like she made an effort, or maybe she was waiting for me to make the next move. Either way, I was fine with the silence. But of course, just when I'd started to relax and move on with my evening, my phone buzzed again. It was Amy. She'd replied, "Can we meet up? I don't want to do this over text." I stared at the message for a while, not sure how to feel about it. Part of me was curious, sure. I mean, I'd been waiting for some kind of explanation for years. But at the same time, the other part of me was still holding on to all that frustration and anger. I didn't know if I was ready to meet her face to face, especially not with all the wedding stuff still hanging over our heads. But in the end, I figured if I didn't meet her now, I'd never get any real closure on this whole situation. So I sent back a quick reply. All right, when and where? We ended up agreeing to meet at this little coffee shop downtown the next afternoon. Nothing too fancy, just a quiet place where we could talk. As I walked in the next day, I could feel that familiar tension in my chest. I hadn't seen Amy in years, and I had no idea what this conversation was going to look like. She was already sitting at a table when I walked in, staring at her phone. She looked up when I approached, and for a second we just kind of awkwardly stared at each other. She looked different. Not in a bad way, just more grown up, I guess. It was weird seeing her after all this time. Hey, she said quietly. Hey, I replied, taking a seat across from her. The tension was thick, like neither of us knew where to start. After a long pause, she sighed. Look, I know things between us have been bad, and I get why you're mad. I probably deserve it. That caught me off guard. I'd expected her to jump straight into wedding talk, maybe even ask for money directly. But here she was, admitting she'd screwed up. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, letting her continue. I messed up a lot, I know that, and I'm not asking you to forget everything, but I just wanted to try to fix things, before it's too late. I leaned back in my chair, processing her words. Part of me wanted to be skeptical, to believe she was just saying this because she needed something from me. But another part of me saw how genuine she looked. Like maybe, just maybe, she really wanted to make things right. I don't know, Amy, I said finally. A lot's happened. You can't just undo all of that with an apology. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I know, but I have to try. And for the first time in years, I realized that maybe this wasn't about the wedding. Maybe this was about something more. Forced my parents to disown their golden boy when it came out, he was the affair child, not me. So yeah, my family has always been messed up. I'm Nick, 21M, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been the black sheep. My dad, Joe, never liked me, that much was clear. He ran this small HVAC business that my grandpa started years ago. But here's the thing. The business doesn't really belong to him. It's in some trust that my grandpa set up, and it's only supposed to go to the biological grandkids. Basically, my dad works there but doesn't have any real power, and he's always kind of resented that. Guess he's not good with money or something. So my grandpa didn't trust him with the business finances. Now, here's where things get even messier. I've got this half-brother, Max, 23M, and he's always been the golden child. My dad treats him like he can do no wrong, while I've always been the one blamed for everything. Doesn't matter what it is, it's somehow my fault. I never really understood why until recently. So 3 years ago, my dad found these old diaries my mom, Sarah, kept from years ago. And let me tell you, it was like my whole world turned upside down when he found them. Apparently, my mom had this long affair that no one knew about. Her lover? Some dude who died in a car crash about 12 years ago. And here's the kicker. Oh, I said I wasn't going to use that. Sorry. This affair lasted a while, like years. My dad's been sitting on this info ever since he found out, and it was a whole screaming match between them for days. At first, I thought it was just their usual fights, but then my dad dropped the bomb on me and Max. He basically tells us both, we need to do DNA tests. Like, what? Max and I were just sitting there, stunned. Turns out my grandpa, the one who started the business, hated my mom because he always suspected she was fooling around. He was convinced that one of us, maybe both of us, wasn't my dad's real kid. So now my dad's all fired up because if it turns out either of us isn't his kid, that person gets nothing. Nada. No claim to the family business, no inheritance, nothing. And I could just see it in his eyes. He was dead set on me being the one to get kicked out. He's always treated me like I didn't belong, like I wasn't part of the family. I used to think it was just me being paranoid, but this whole DNA test thing proved it. The only reason he cared about this at all was because of the business and the money. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given a damn about whether I was his or not. So we all go down to this lab for the tests. The car ride there was probably one of the worst moments of my life. My dad was completely quiet, just staring straight ahead like he already knew what the results would say. Max was sitting next to me in the back seat, grinning like the smug asshole he's always been, like he was sure I'd be the one getting kicked out of the family. I just sat there, staring out the window, trying to wrap my head around the fact that my entire future was riding on a damn DNA test. We get the test done, and the waiting was hell. They told us we'd get the results in a few days, but those days felt like years. I barely slept, just lying awake, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. And honestly, I didn't know which would be worse. Finding out I wasn't my dad's kid and getting kicked out, or finding out Max wasn't his kid and watching my dad's world crumble. Finally, the day came. We went to the lawyer's office to get the results. My heart was pounding the whole time. The lawyer opens up the envelope, and I swear it felt like the whole room went silent. Then he reads the results. I'm my dad's biological son. And Max? He's not. The whole room just froze. My dad's face went pale, and Max just stared, his jaw dropping like he couldn't believe it. I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. After all these years of being treated like crap, I was the real son, not Max, the golden boy. But here's where things get even crazier. Turns out the house we live in is also part of this whole trust deal. It was only supposed to go to the biological grandkids, which means it's mine now. My dad had always assumed Max would get everything, but now, legally, Max gets nothing. The business, the house, all of it. It's mine. On the drive back home, my dad didn't say a word. Max, though, kept running his mouth, talking crap like, this isn't fair, and there must have been a mistake. He was acting like the test results were some kind of joke. But my dad? He looked broken. I've never seen him like that before. He's always been this tough, distant guy, but now he looked like someone had ripped his whole life apart. That night, my dad tried to make things right. He came into my room, and I could tell he'd been crying. I've never seen my dad cry before, and it kind of freaked me out. He sat down on the edge of my bed and just started talking, saying he was sorry, that he'd messed up, that he wanted to fix things between us. He looked so desperate, like he was begging me to forgive him. But I couldn't. Not after everything. Not after the way he treated me my whole life. So I told him, if you really want to make it up to me, kick Max out. You were ready to kick me out if I wasn't your son, so do the same to him. My dad just stared at me, like he couldn't believe what I was saying. He started to argue, saying we could go to family counseling, that we could all try to fix this together. But I wasn't having it. I told him straight up, you were going to throw me out if I wasn't your kid. Now it's Max's turn. He cried some more, but eventually he agreed. That night, Max was kicked out of the house and my dad was in tears the whole time. He didn't even yell or anything, just quietly told Max he had to go. Max was furious, obviously, but he didn't really have a choice. He packed up his stuff and left. And you'd think that after all of this, things would get better between me and my parents, right? Nope. If anything, things got worse. My dad's been walking around like a broken man ever since, and my mom, she's just been silent. Like, she hasn't said a word about any of this. It's like she's pretending none of this is happening, which honestly pisses me off even more. I don't even know what's next, but all I can say is, this family is beyond repair. So, after Max got kicked out, you'd think things would chill out, right? Nope. If anything, it got more awkward around the house. My dad, Joe, was walking around like a ghost, barely speaking to anyone, and my mom, Sarah, was still silent, just pretending like none of this mess had happened. The house felt empty, even though I was still living there. I thought maybe kicking Max out would change something, but all it did was make my parents even more distant. The first few days after Max left, it was almost like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I could tell my dad was trying to figure out what to do next, but instead of talking to me like a normal person, he just stayed quiet. I knew he was hurting, but I wasn't exactly in the mood to comfort him. The guy had spent most of my life treating me like I didn't matter, and now I was supposed to feel sorry for him? Yeah, not happening. One night, about a week after Max left, my dad tried to have this big talk with me. He sat me down in the living room, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He kept fidgeting, like he didn't know how to start the conversation, which was weird, because my dad was always the type of guy who just said whatever was on his mind. Finally, he started talking, and honestly, it was kind of pathetic. He was like, Nick, I know I haven't been the best father, and I know things are complicated now, but I really want to fix this. He kept going on and on about how he wanted to rebuild our relationship and make things right. He even started tearing up, which threw me off because, like I said before, I've never seen my dad cry until this whole DNA mess. I let him talk for a while, but the more he talked, the angrier I got. I was just sitting there, listening to him say how sorry he was and how much he regretted everything, and all I could think was, why now? Why are you only sorry because Max isn't your kid? It felt like he didn't actually care about me, just about the fact that he couldn't rely on Max anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that if the DNA test had gone the other way, I'd be the one out on the streets, and Max would still be the golden child. So, I cut him off. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You're only sorry because you need me now. You don't actually care about me. You never did. You only care about the business and the money." My dad looked like I'd slapped him across the face. He just sat there, stunned, like he couldn't believe I was saying that. But it was the truth. I wasn't going to let him pretend like this was some heartwarming family reunion moment. It wasn't. He tried to argue, of course. He was like, "No, Nick, it's not like that. I love you. I've always loved you. I didn't know how to show it." Yeah, sure. He loved me so much that he spent years treating me like garbage while Max got all the praise. I wasn't buying it. I didn't even bother responding. I just got up and left the room. I couldn't sit there and listen to him try to rewrite history like that. It was too much. I went upstairs to my room and slammed the door. I could hear him downstairs pacing around, probably trying to figure out what to do next. But I didn't care. I was done with his fake apologies. After that, things got even more tense around the house. My dad stopped trying to talk to me altogether, which I was fine with, honestly. My mom still wasn't saying anything. She was just there, like a statue. I started spending more time at work, trying to avoid being home as much as possible. The family business wasn't exactly my dream job, but at least it was a way to keep myself busy. That's when Max started calling me. At first, I ignored his calls. I mean, why would I want to talk to him? The guy had spent years treating me like dirt, and now that he wasn't the golden boy anymore, he suddenly wanted to reconnect? Yeah, no thanks. But he didn't stop. He kept calling and calling, leaving voicemails, sending texts. It was annoying as hell. One day, I finally gave in and answered. I figured I might as well hear what he had to say. The second I picked up the phone, Max went off. He was yelling about how unfair everything was, how he didn't deserve to be kicked out, how our parents were treating him like crap now. I let him rant for a bit, but then he dropped a bomb. Max told me that our mom had cheated with more than one guy. Yeah, apparently the guy who died in the car crash wasn't the only one. There was another dude, some guy she worked with back in the day. And Max was threatening to tell our dad if I didn't help him get back in the house. I was floored. Like, I knew my mom wasn't a saint, but I didn't expect this. Max kept going, saying that he had proof, that he'd found more of my mom's old diaries and letters that basically confirmed she'd been screwing around with multiple guys. He said he'd kept quiet about it all these years because he didn't want to ruin the family, but now that he was out on his ass, he didn't care anymore. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to call Max's bluff, but another part of me believed him. It explained a lot about why my dad was always so paranoid and why he treated me the way he did. Maybe he'd always suspected that none of us were really his kids. Max was like, "Look, Nick, I don't want to blow this thing up, but if you don't help me out, I'm telling Dad everything. He'll kick Mom out, and this whole family's going to be destroyed." He was basically blackmailing me. I told him I'd think about it and hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the wall, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. Max had always been a jerk, but this was next level. He was willing to blow up our entire family just to get back at me for kicking him out. And the worst part? I didn't know if I even cared anymore. By the end of the night, I decided I wasn't going to play Max's game. If he wanted to tell our dad, fine. Let him. I wasn't going to help him just because he had some dirt on our mom. If our family was going to fall apart, it wasn't my job to hold it together. And with that, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to answer Max's calls anymore. If he wanted to burn everything down, so be it. A few weeks after Max threatened me with that whole, "I'm going to blow up the family" crap, things somehow got even worse. Like, I didn't think it was possible, but here we were. My dad, Joe, was still moping around the house like someone had died, and my mom, Sarah, was still silent as ever. I was doing my best to just stay out of it all, going to work, coming home, and keeping my head down. But of course, nothing ever stays quiet for long in this family. One night, I came home from work, and the house felt weird. Like, you know when you walk into a place and you can just feel something's off? That was the vibe. I heard my parents talking in the kitchen, but it wasn't their usual low-key arguing. It sounded serious, like they were trying to keep their voices down, but failing. My curiosity got the better of me, so I crept closer to the door, trying to hear what was going on. And that's when I heard it. My dad was yelling, "You think I don't know? You think I'm an idiot?" And my mom finally was talking back, her voice shaky. "Joe, please, it was years ago. It doesn't mean anything now." My heart dropped. Max had done it. He'd told my dad about the other guy, the one my mom had been seeing behind his back. I felt a weird mix of emotions: relief, anger, guilt. I mean, I knew Max was capable of doing it, but a part of me didn't think he'd actually go through with it. Now, here we were, and my dad was finding out that my mom had cheated on him with multiple guys. I didn't want to listen anymore, so I went upstairs to my room and shut the door. But even up there, I could still hear them yelling. My dad was shouting about betrayal and how he should have left her years ago, while my mom was sobbing, saying it was all in the past and that she loved him. It was brutal. Later that night, my dad came upstairs and knocked on my door. I wasn't in the mood to talk, but I opened it anyway. He stood there, looking more broken than I'd ever seen him, like he'd aged 10 years in one day. He didn't say much, just asked if I knew about the other guy. I didn't lie. I told him I found out when Max called me a couple weeks ago. He nodded, his face going pale, and then he said something that hit me hard. "I never trusted your mom after that first affair. I didn't trust either of you boys either. That's why I treated you the way I did." I just stood there, frozen. Like, yeah, I'd figured something like this was the reason, but hearing him actually admit it, that messed me up. My whole life I thought I wasn't good enough, that maybe if I worked harder or did better, my dad would finally accept me. But no, it was all because he never really believed I was his kid. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, staring at him. After a minute, he sighed and said, "I'm sorry, Nick. I really am. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know." And then he left, just like that. For the next few days, it was like walking on eggshells in the house. My dad stopped talking to my mom completely. He'd either be in his office or out at work, and she was always upstairs, locked in their bedroom. It was weird, but at the same time, I kind of felt like it was a long time coming. They should have divorced years ago, honestly. Then Max showed up. Yeah, after all the crap he pulled, he had the nerve to come back to the house. It was a Saturday, and I was just chilling in the living room watching TV when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it, and there he was, standing on the porch with this smug look on his face like he hadn't just nuked our entire family. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, not even trying to hide the anger in my voice. Max shrugged like it was no big deal. "I wanted to talk. Can I come in?" "No," I said, stepping outside and shutting the door behind me. "We don't have anything to talk about." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Nick. Don't be like that. Look, I didn't want to have to tell Dad, but you left me no choice. You kicked me out, remember?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're really going to stand there and act like you're the victim in all of this?" Max sighed like he was tired of the conversation already. "Look, it's not about that. I just want things to go back to the way they were. We were a family before all this, man." I couldn't help but laugh. "A family? Are you serious? We were never a family. You were the favorite, and I was the one Dad blamed for everything. You got whatever you wanted, and I was always the one left out. So don't give me that we were a family crap." Max's expression changed. He wasn't smug anymore. He looked pissed. "You know what, Nick? Fine. I was the favorite, but at least I wasn't some bitter, jealous loser like you." That hit a nerve. I stepped closer to him, my fists clenched. "Get the hell out of here, Max. You're not welcome here anymore." He smirked, like he'd won some kind of victory. "Fine. But don't be surprised when Mom and Dad end up splitting because of all this. You're just as much to blame as I am." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the porch, seething. After he left, I went back inside trying to calm down, but his words kept echoing in my head. "You're just as much to blame." Was he right? Had I played a part in tearing this family apart? I didn't want to believe it, but maybe there was some truth to it. Maybe if I hadn't pushed my dad to kick Max out, things wouldn't have gotten this bad. But then I remembered how they treated me, how they were ready to throw me out like I was nothing. Max wasn't innocent in all this. He'd been the favorite for years, and now that the tables had turned, he couldn't handle it. By the end of the night, I was drained. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was for sure. There was no going back to how things were before. This family was broken, and no amount of fake apologies or half-hearted attempts to fix it were going to change that. Update 2. Things didn't calm down after Max's visit. In fact, it felt like everything was starting to unravel faster than ever. My dad was barely at home anymore. He'd leave early for work, come home late, and when he was here, he was just locked up in his office. My mom, Sarah, still wasn't talking to him, or to me for that matter. It was like she was just checked out. I guess when your whole life blows up, it's hard to know how to handle it. But still, it was weird watching my parents fall apart like this. It felt like I was living with strangers. And honestly, I was starting to lose it too. It's not like I was ever close to my parents, but I wasn't expecting things to get this bad. The house was dead quiet all the time, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the whole situation was somehow my fault. Like maybe if I'd handled things differently with Max, or if I hadn't pushed so hard for him to get kicked out, maybe this wouldn't have blown up the way it did. But every time I started to feel guilty, I'd remind myself that they were ready to throw me out if I hadn't been my dad's biological son, so why should I care? But here's the thing, caring or not, living in a house where everyone's pretending the other doesn't exist is pretty messed up. A couple weeks after Max's little visit, my dad came to me again, but this time he didn't look sad. He looked determined. And that's when I knew something was up. "Nick, we need to talk," he said, standing in my doorway. I sighed, already tired of whatever conversation this was about to be. "What is it now?" He came in and sat down on the edge of my bed, like he was trying to figure out how to start. "I've been thinking," he began, rubbing his hands together nervously, "and I've decided to file for divorce." I sat up straighter. "Wait, what?" He nodded, his eyes still fixed on his hands. "I can't do this anymore. Your mom, I can't forgive her for what she's done. I thought maybe I could, but I can't. There's too much damage." For a second, I didn't know how to respond. I mean, I wasn't shocked. This felt like it was bound to happen sooner or later. But hearing him actually say it was different. "So, that's it? You're just going to end it?" My dad sighed, finally looking up at me. "Yeah, I know it's a lot to take in, but it's the right thing to do. I've talked to a lawyer, and we'll get started on the paperwork soon. I wanted to tell you first." I didn't know what to feel. On one hand, I couldn't really blame him. My mom had lied to him for years. But on the other hand, this was going to be the end of whatever little bit of family I had left. "Does Mom know?" I asked, already guessing the answer. He shook his head. "Not yet. I'll tell her soon. I wanted to make sure you were okay with it first." Was I okay with it? I mean, did it even matter if I was? It wasn't like I had a say in what happened between them. Still, the thought of my parents splitting up felt strange, even though things had been terrible for a long time. "Yeah, I guess," I mumbled, not really sure how to express what I was feeling. My dad stood up and patted me on the shoulder, which felt weird and awkward. "I'm sorry, Nick. I know this hasn't been easy for you." And then he left the room, leaving me sitting there, trying to process what was happening. Divorce. My parents were actually getting divorced. Part of me wanted to say good riddance, but another part of me felt sad, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it was the finality of it all that got to me. The next few days were tense. I kept expecting my dad to drop the bomb on my mom, but he didn't. Instead, it was just more of the same. Silence, avoidance, everyone pretending like the house wasn't about to fall apart. I didn't know when he planned to tell her, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to be around when it happened. And then, one night, it happened. I was in my room, trying to fall asleep, when I heard shouting from downstairs. My heart sank, and I knew instantly that my dad had finally told her. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I could hear enough. My mom was crying, screaming about how he couldn't do this, how she'd made mistakes, but she still loved him. My dad, though, wasn't backing down. He was shouting too, yelling about betrayal and how he couldn't trust her anymore. It was ugly, really ugly. I stayed in my room, listening to them tear each other apart, feeling like I should have done something, anything, but knowing there wasn't much I could do. After what felt like forever, the shouting finally stopped. I heard my mom sobbing as she ran up the stairs and slammed the door to their bedroom. The next morning, the house was even quieter than usual. My mom didn't come out of her room at all, and my dad was acting like nothing had happened. He sat at the kitchen table, drinking his coffee and reading the newspaper like it was just another day. I didn't know what to say to him, so I didn't say anything. I just grabbed some breakfast and left for work, trying to avoid any awkward conversations. But when I got home that night, things had escalated. My mom had packed up a bunch of her stuff. Her suitcases were sitting in the hallway, and she was standing by the front door, talking on the phone with someone. I don't know who she was talking to, but it sounded like she was making arrangements to leave. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call and wiped her eyes. Nick, I'm going to stay with your aunt for a while, she said, her voice shaking. I didn't know what to say. Okay, was all I could manage. She gave me a sad smile, then pulled me into a hug. I'm so sorry, honey. I know this is hard. But I'll still be around. We'll figure this out. I didn't hug her back. I just stood there, feeling numb, waiting for her to let go. When she finally did, she grabbed her bags and left without another word. And just like that, she was gone. Update 3. After my mom left, it was just me and my dad in the house. It felt way emptier than it should have, like all the air had been sucked out of the place. We didn't really talk much after that night. He was still doing his thing, going to work, and pretending like everything was normal, but I could tell it wasn't. I mean, how could it be? I don't know if he was waiting for me to ask how I was feeling, or if he just didn't want to deal with it, but either way, we both just kind of avoided the subject. We barely even made eye contact in the kitchen, and the silence was heavier than it had ever been before. It wasn't long before Max decided to stir things up again. I swear, the guy's like a bad rash that just won't go away. One day I'm sitting at home after work, just trying to watch TV and forget about the fact that my family's falling apart, and I get a text from Max. Max, we need to talk. I almost laughed when I saw it. Talk? About what? The dude had blown up our family, blackmailed me, and now he wanted to talk? I ignored the message at first, but then my phone started blowing up with more texts. Max, it's important. Max, I'm serious, Nick. Max, you can't ignore me forever. He was relentless. After about 10 messages, I finally gave in and called him. I figured I might as well get it over with and hear whatever crap he had to say. Nick, Max said, sounding way too casual for my liking. I've been thinking. Oh, this should be good, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. What do you want now, Max? He ignored my tone and continued. Look, I know things are bad between us, but you gotta understand. This whole thing wasn't my fault. I scoffed. Not your fault? You're the one who told Dad about Mom's other affair. You're the one who started this whole mess. Max sighed like he was the victim here. Yeah, but come on, Nick. Don't act like this family was perfect before that. I don't know. I did what I had to do. I could feel my blood boiling. What you had to do? You ruined everything, Max. You threw us all under the bus because you were mad you got kicked out. Don't act like you're some innocent bystander. He didn't say anything for a second, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally shut up. But nope. He kept going. I know. But look, I have a plan. I rolled my eyes. A plan? Really? What kind of plan? Max sounded excited now, like he actually believed this was a good idea. We need to get Mom and Dad back together. I almost dropped my phone. What? Think about it, Nick. If we can get them to talk, to work things out, maybe things can go back to normal. We were a family once, right? Are you out of your mind? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They're getting divorced, Max. It's over. There's no fixing this. But Max wasn't listening. He was already rambling about how we could stage some kind of intervention or family meeting, get everyone in the same room and force them to talk it out. He actually thought this was going to work, like some cheesy movie where everyone hugs at the end and everything's fine. I cut him off. Max, stop. Just stop. This isn't a movie, okay? You can't just force people to forgive each other and move on. Dad's done. He's already filed for divorce. And Mom? She's living with Aunt Karen now. It's over. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Max spoke again, but this time his voice was quieter, more serious. Nick, I don't want to lose this family. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to laugh in his face. Like, really, Max? After everything you've done, now you care about the family? But another part of me felt bad for him, I guess. As much as I hated to admit it, he wasn't the only one who'd lost something. We all had. Look, I said, my tone softer now. I get it. This sucks for all of us. But there's nothing we can do. It's too late. Max didn't respond right away, and for a second I thought maybe he'd finally understood. But then he said, well, I'm gonna try anyway. And that's when I knew Max was a lost cause. He was stuck in this fantasy where everything could just magically be fixed if we all tried hard enough. I wished it were that easy, but life doesn't work like that. After I hung up, I felt this weird mix of emotions, anger, sadness, frustration, all of it wrapped together. I didn't know how to move on from this. My parents were done, my mom had left, my dad was a wreck, and Max? He was delusional, thinking he could somehow put the pieces back together. The next few weeks dragged on, and things didn't really get any better. My dad stayed locked in his office most of the time, and I just kept going to work, trying to distract myself from the mess at home. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it was always there, hanging over my head like a dark cloud. One night, after another long day at work, I came home to find my dad sitting at the kitchen table. He looked up when I walked in, and for the first time in a while, he actually spoke to me. "Nick," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." I froze. I wasn't expecting that. "For what?" "For everything," he replied, looking down at his hands. "I've messed up. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I know I can't fix all of them, but I'm trying. I don't want us to end up like them, like me and your mom." I didn't know what to say. It was the most honest thing I'd heard from him in a long time, and it caught me off guard. I'd spent so much time being angry at him, blaming him for everything, that I didn't know how to respond when he actually showed some vulnerability. So I just nodded. "Yeah, me neither." We didn't say much after that. It wasn't some big emotional moment or anything, but it was something. Maybe things weren't totally broken after all.
The prestigious halls of Riverside Academy stood tall against the morning sky, its brick walls and manicured lawns a testament to decades of academic excellence. But behind its polished facade, an ugly truth was about to surface, one that would shake the institution to its core. Sarah Chen was more than just another 13-year-old starting her first day. She was the daughter of Diana Chen, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the city, whose philanthropic work had transformed countless lives. Diana had built her empire from nothing, breaking through barriers that society had placed in her way, becoming a beacon of hope for minorities in the business world. For Sarah, walking through Riverside's gates that morning felt like stepping into another world. Her navy blazer was identical to everyone else's, yet somehow it felt different on her shoulders. The whispers followed her down the corridor, quiet but sharp enough to cut. She held her books closer, trying to make herself smaller as she searched for room 237, Dr. Patterson's advanced chemistry class. Dr. Patterson was a legend at Riverside. Tall, silver-haired, with wire-rimmed glasses that seemed to judge before they saw. His reputation preceded him, brilliant but ruthless, demanding nothing less than perfection. What Sarah didn't know was that his definition of perfection had nothing to do with academic excellence. The first signs were subtle. Her raised hand ignored during discussions. Her correct answers met with skeptical eyebrows. But Dr. Patterson was careful, too careful to be obvious. Until that day in late September, when his mask finally slipped, and his true colors emerged in front of 28 witnesses. What he didn't realize was that his calculated humiliation of Sarah Chen would become his ultimate undoing. He had no idea who her mother really was, or what she was capable of. Diana Chen hadn't fought her way to the top by staying silent in the face of injustice, and she wasn't about to start now. This is a story about power, prejudice, and the courage to stand up against discrimination. Here on Real Life Stories New, we bring you the tale of how one mother's love and determination brought a decades-old system of bias crashing down, changing Riverside Academy forever. It started with a chemistry experiment, one that would ignite a chain reaction far beyond the confines of room 237. Dr. Patterson had selected Sarah to demonstrate a complex reaction involving volatile compounds, his thin smile barely masking his intentions. The flask trembled slightly in Sarah's hands as 28 pairs of eyes locked onto her every move. "Careful now, Miss Chen," Dr. Patterson's voice cut through the silence, dripping with condescension. "This requires a certain level of precision that some students might find challenging." A few snickers rippled through the classroom as Sarah's cheeks burned. When a drop of solution spilled onto the lab table, Dr. Patterson's reaction was swift and cruel. "And this, class," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "is precisely why some students should stick to simpler tasks. Not everyone is cut out for real science." The laughter that followed felt like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. Sarah's vision blurred with unshed tears as she rushed back to her seat, her world crumbling around her. That evening, Diana Chen noticed something was wrong the moment her daughter walked through the door. The usual spark in Sarah's eyes had dimmed, replaced by a shadow that no mother could ignore. Over dinner, the truth spilled out in broken whispers and quiet tears. He makes me feel so stupid, Mom, Sarah confessed, her voice barely audible. Like I don't deserve to be there, no matter how hard I try. Diana's hand tightened around her fork, her successful entrepreneur's composure cracking at the sight of her daughter's pain. You listen to me, Sarah, Diana said, her voice steady but fierce. You deserve to be there as much as anyone else. And Dr. Patterson? He's about to learn a very important lesson about underestimating people. Diana spent the night making calls, reaching out to other parents whose children had suffered similar treatment. Jennifer Martinez, whose son had been systematically excluded from advanced projects. Michael Washington, whose daughter had transferred schools after months of subtle degradation. One by one, they shared their stories, each account building a damning picture of systematic discrimination. Working with her longtime friend and civil rights attorney, Rachel Goldman, Diana compiled a comprehensive dossier of incidents, testimonies, and documented patterns of behavior. But she knew that in the world of prestigious private education, timing was everything. The next parent-teacher conference was approaching, and Diana prepared meticulously. She chose her weapon carefully, not anger or threats, but cold, hard facts and the power of public accountability. The conference room fell silent as Diana Chen walked in, her presence commanding attention before she spoke a single word. Before the school board and fellow parents, Diana laid out her case with surgical precision. For years, she began, her voice clear and unwavering, Riverside Academy has prided itself on excellence. But excellence cannot coexist with prejudice. Dr. Patterson's behavior isn't just unprofessional, it's toxic, discriminatory, and it ends today. She presented the testimonies, the documented incidents, the pattern of behavior that could no longer be ignored. Dr. Patterson's face grew increasingly pale as Diana revealed her trump card, a recording from Sarah's phone capturing his latest discriminatory tirade. The board members exchanged nervous glances as Diana concluded her presentation. You have a choice, she stated firmly. Address this issue now, thoroughly and transparently, or explain to the media why Riverside Academy believes discrimination is acceptable in 2024. The investigation that followed was swift and comprehensive. Other students, emboldened by Sarah's courage, came forward with their own stories. Dr. Patterson's decades-long facade of academic excellence crumbled in the face of overwhelming evidence. Within weeks, the board called a special meeting. Dr. Patterson was placed on immediate administrative leave pending further review. But Diana wasn't finished. She worked with the board to establish new policies and training programs, ensuring that what happened to Sarah would never happen to another student. For Sarah, watching her mother fight this battle taught her something more valuable than any chemistry lesson. It showed her that standing up against injustice wasn't just about personal vindication, it was about creating change that would benefit others. The halls of Riverside Academy still stand tall against the morning sky, but something fundamental has shifted within those brick walls. Where once there was silence in the face of discrimination, now there is a voice, many voices, ready to speak up and be heard. Diana's actions did more than protect her daughter, they transformed an institution. New diversity training programs were implemented, hiring practices were revised, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination was established. The change rippled through the educational community, prompting other schools to examine their own practices. 1 year later, Sarah Chen stands at the top of her class in advanced chemistry. The laboratory where she once faced humiliation has become a place of discovery and growth. Her story, and her mother's unwavering fight for justice, inspired a wave of change that continues to ripple through educational institutions across the country. What my mom taught me, Sarah reflects, her voice strong and clear, is that sometimes the most important chemical reaction is the one that transforms fear into courage. Diana Chen's legacy at Riverside Academy isn't just about ending discrimination, it's about showing every student that they have the power to stand up and make their voices heard. Sometimes the most powerful lessons aren't found in textbooks, but in the courage to challenge injustice when we see it. If you've ever faced discrimination or know someone who has, share your story in the comments below. Let's create a community where everyone's voice matters. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers on Real Life Stories New, where we bring you powerful stories of courage, justice, and transformation that need to be told. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to never miss another inspiring story of real people making real change. Together, we can make a difference, one story at a time.
An elderly woman, forgotten and neglected by her own family, walked alone through the streets, carrying the weight of a life filled with loneliness. As she passed by a trash can, a faint sound made her stop. Her heart raced when she saw a baby abandoned among the garbage bags. Trembling, she approached, and as she picked the child up in her arms, she found a letter attached to the small body. The words written left her terrified. "I can't go on. Discovering that I am..." That unfinished sentence held a dark secret, and she knew her life would never be the same. It was a morning like any other for Maria Grazia. The sun had barely risen on the horizon, casting a pale glow over the empty streets of the neighborhood. She clutched her coat against her body while pushing her old wheelbarrow, filled with discarded items she collected to turn into something useful. At 64, life had never been easy for her, and loneliness was her only constant companion. Without children or a husband, Maria Grazia survived on the little she earned selling her crafts at fairs. As she walked, something unusual caught her attention. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, coming from a nearby trash can. Initially, she thought it was a cat or a dog trapped inside, but the sound was different, more human. Curious and a bit frightened, she approached. The trash can was filled with crumpled papers and leftover food, but deep inside something was moving. With trembling hands, Maria Grazia began to remove the garbage that covered the sound. When she finally had a clear view, her heart stopped for a second. Wrapped in a dirty blanket was a little girl with wide eyes and an innocent smile on her face. "My God," murmured Maria Grazia, bringing her hands to her mouth in disbelief. She looked around, fearing she would be seen. The street was deserted and the silence was almost oppressive. Her first instinct was to run away, to leave it all behind, as if she had never seen the child. After all, what could she, an old and poor woman, do for an abandoned baby? But something stopped her from moving. The girl's gaze, her fragility, and that small hand reaching out to her held her in place. "Who left you here?" whispered Maria Grazia, feeling the weight of responsibility fall on her shoulders. Gently she cradled the baby, trying to soothe her. It was a little girl, no more than a few months old. There was an envelope attached to the blanket, along with a small bag containing some belongings. When she opened the envelope, Maria Grazia found a letter, written in careful but hurried handwriting. "Please take care of her. I can't go on. I am sick and cannot protect her. Her name is Antonella. All I ask is that she grows up in a home full of love. God bless her." Maria Grazia read the letter several times, trying to absorb what had just happened. Her body trembled, not just from the morning chill, but from the magnitude of the decision she would have to make. She looked again at the girl in her arms. Antonella. That was her name now. The baby's gentle smile shattered something inside her. The loneliness she had carried for so many years began to dissolve, replaced by a new emotion, the responsibility of being needed by someone. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The neighborhood where she lived was cruel, filled with gossip and judgment, especially for someone like her, an elderly woman who had already been betrayed and abandoned by her husband. But for some reason, the thought of leaving Antonella behind seemed even more impossible. "Come on, little one," said Maria Grazia, with a newfound determination in her voice. "Let's go home." She covered the girl with the blanket once more, placed her in her wheelbarrow, and began to push it back to her humble home. As she passed through the door, Maria Grazia felt the weight of her new reality. She had no idea how she would take care of the girl, where she would find the resources, but she knew that somehow she would find a way. She settled Antonella in an old wicker basket, improvised as a cradle, and watched the little girl fall asleep quickly, as if she knew she was now safe. Sitting at the kitchen table, Maria Grazia wondered what the future held for them. The only thing she knew for sure was that from that moment on, her life would never be the same. With the girl asleep and her heart full of doubts, Maria Grazia offered a brief prayer, thanking for the unexpected gift she had found that cold morning. She knew that the challenges were just beginning, but Antonella's smile, even in those few hours, had already sparked a flame of hope in her heart. That same night, while Antonella slept peacefully in her makeshift cradle, Maria Grazia couldn't close her eyes. She looked at the little girl, feeling a mix of fear and hope stirring inside her. Memories of her own life began to invade her mind, bringing to the surface old wounds that had never fully healed. Maria Grazia had once been married. Diego was his name. In the early years, they were happy. He was a hard-working man with a good heart, and together they dreamed of starting a family. But fate had been cruel. When she finally became pregnant, after many years of trying, their joy was shattered by tragedy. She lost the baby in a fall on a rainy day, and the pain of that moment never left her. "I also dreamed of being a mother," Maria Grazia whispered to herself, feeling a tear roll down her cheek. The loss of the child changed everything. Diego, once loving and supportive, began to drift away. Grief consumed them both, but in different ways. While Maria Grazia sank into loneliness and guilt, Diego sought refuge in other people, and eventually in another woman. He betrayed her and left, leaving her alone with the weight of a life that would never be what she had imagined. "You left me when I needed you the most," she murmured, staring into the void. Now looking at Antonella, Maria Grazia felt that something inside her was healing, even if slowly and painfully. The child had arrived unexpectedly, and the responsibility of caring for her made Maria Grazia feel useful again, something she hadn't felt in years, but the fear of failing consumed her as well. "I can't take care of you. I'm just an old woman with nothing," she said softly, as if speaking to the girl. But Antonella slept, innocent and unaware of the whirlwind of emotions passing through Maria Grazia's mind. The elderly woman's heart, however, was divided. She knew that raising a child would be difficult, especially under her current circumstances. She could barely sustain herself with what she earned from recycling and crafts, and the city, with its relentless residents, was no place for someone like Antonella. However, every time she looked at the little girl, the memory of her painful past. She remembered how she had dreamed of holding her own child in her arms, singing to him and watching him grow. What had been taken from her so cruelly now seemed to have returned unexpectedly. Diego. The name still echoed in her mind like a distant memory. Since he left her, Maria Grazia had never heard from him again, nor had she sought him out. The resentment she carried was too heavy, and reliving that past seemed futile. But now, with Antonella in her life, she felt the need to make peace with what had happened. "Maybe this is my chance to do things differently," she reflected, almost as if talking to the baby. Despite all the difficulties, something about Antonella's presence made her feel that this was her second chance. Even though she no longer had the strength and youth of her earlier days, she now possessed the wisdom of her years and the resilience of someone who had survived pain. She decided that no matter how difficult it was, she would give everything she could so that Antonella would have what she could never provide for the child she lost. Maria Grazia rose from her chair and walked to the window of her small home. The night was silent, and the cold of the early morning seeped into the room. Outside, the stars shone faintly, but the moon was full, illuminating the sleeping neighborhood. "Tomorrow will be another day," she said with a heavy sigh. She knew she couldn't count on anyone to help her. However, she also knew that she would not leave the little girl behind, just as life had left her so many times. With one last look at Antonella, Maria Grazia went to bed, still with her heart heavy. As she closed her eyes, the memories of the past began to slowly fade away, giving way to the image of an uncertain future, yet full of possibilities. The next morning brought a new light for Maria Grazia, but with it came the weight of the decisions she would need to make. The day had barely begun when Antonella woke up with her delicate cry. Maria Grazia, still getting used to the idea of caring for a child, went to the makeshift cradle and picked the girl up in her arms, trying to soothe her with a soft voice. "It's okay, Piccola. "Mama is here," she said, in a tone that surprised even herself. Maria Grazia had never called herself a mother before. The sound of that word slipped from her lips as if it had always been a part of her, and for a moment she felt more connected to Antonella than she had ever imagined. However, the reality of her situation would not take long to knock on her door. While feeding the baby with an improvised bottle, Maria Grazia began to reflect on the difficulties she would face. Her resources were limited, and the little money she earned would barely be enough to support a child. Even so, something inside her had already decided she would not leave Antonella. With Antonella in her arms, Maria Grazia stepped out onto the street, feeling the curious and suspicious gazes of her neighbors. News spread quickly in small neighborhoods, and soon everyone knew that the elderly woman had found a baby. The whispers and judging looks followed her around every corner. "Did you hear? She has a child now. I don't know how she's going to manage," one of the neighbors whispered, pressing her lips in disapproval. "That old woman can hardly take care of herself. Imagine a baby," another replied, laughing softly. Maria Grazia heard the comments but stood firm. She knew that people didn't understand her decision, but they also couldn't comprehend the emptiness she had carried for so many years. Antonella was now her light, and for the first time in a long time, Maria Grazia had something to fight for. As she collected bottles and recyclable cans in front of a store, one of the merchants, Salvatore, called her over to talk. "Maria Grazia, I heard you have a baby. Is that true?" he asked, his face creased with concern. She took a deep breath before responding. "Yes, Salvatore. I found the little girl abandoned, and I couldn't leave her there. She is my responsibility now." Salvatore looked at her with a mix of admiration and surprise. "But how will you take care of her? You know how things are around here. It won't be easy." He scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Maria Grazia nodded, aware of the difficulties. "I know it won't be easy, but I can't abandon her. I am all she has." Her voice was firm, but her eyes revealed the uncertainty she felt inside. Salvatore fell silent for a moment, but then reached out, lightly touching the elderly woman's arm. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me, Maria Grazia." She thanked him with a small smile and continued on her way, realizing that the weight of the decisions she had made wouldn't become lighter anytime soon. The town was small, and everyone knew of her situation. Gossip was inevitable, but she couldn't let it get her down. On her way home, tired and with Antonella asleep in her arms, Maria Grazia looked at the little girl and saw in her more than just an abandoned baby. She saw an opportunity to rewrite her own story, to heal the wounds she had carried from the past, and above all to give Antonella what she had never been able to provide for the child she lost. "We're going to make it, Antonella," she murmured, placing a gentle kiss on the baby's forehead. As she prepared for the night, Maria Grazia mentally organized what she needed to do. She knew she would have to keep working hard to support both of them, but she also understood that now she had a greater responsibility. She needed to ensure that Antonella was always safe, fed, and loved. Deep down, she felt fear. Fear of failing, fear of not being strong enough. But every time Antonella smiled at her, even in her fragile and vulnerable state, Maria Grazia felt her determination grow. No matter what others said, she had decided Antonella would be her daughter. The heartfelt decision was made, and there was no turning back. The sun had barely risen when Maria Grazia left home as usual, with Antonella nestled in an improvised basket. The little girl had already grown accustomed to the simple and modest routine of Maria Grazia, who took her with her wherever she went. As the elderly woman worked, collecting recyclable materials and selling her crafts, Antonella watched the world with curious eyes, absorbing every detail around her. However, that day something different was about to happen. At the end of one of the neighborhood streets, a heavy-set man watched from a distance. Diego. The name that Maria Grazia had been trying to forget for so long. He was back in town, and his presence, though silent and distant, brought with it memories that Maria Grazia preferred to keep buried. Diego had aged poorly. His once vibrant face was marked by deep wrinkles and a tired gaze. Life had not been kind to him since he abandoned Maria Grazia. After leaving her life, He had become involved in several relationships and eventually fell into addictions that corroded everything he had achieved. Now, back in town, he was not the same man Maria Grazia had known all those years ago. Diego watched her from afar as she pushed her wheelbarrow, with Antonella shielded from the wind. He had heard from some neighbors about the girl that Maria Grazia had found, and this intrigued him. He didn't quite know what he was feeling. A mix of regret and curiosity consumed him. Maria Grazia, however, had not noticed his presence. She was focused on her work, as always. When she stopped in front of a store to collect some bottles, Salvatore, the merchant, appeared again. "Maria Grazia, have you heard the latest news?" he asked, with a tense expression. She looked at him, not understanding. "No. What happened?" "Diego is back." The words came out cautiously, aware of the weight they carried. The name echoed in Maria Grazia's mind like a knife slowly turning. For a moment, she felt her legs weaken, but she quickly regained control, masking her shock. "Diego!" She could barely pronounce the name as if it were a strange word in her mouth. Salvatore nodded. "Yes, it seems he came back a few days ago. No one knows for sure why, but he's around." Maria Grazia fell silent, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Diego, the man who had abandoned her during one of the toughest moments of her life, was back. She didn't know how to react. Part of her wanted to hide, to avoid any contact. But another part, the most hurt and resentful, felt the urge to confront him, to demand explanations for the wounds he had caused. "Thank you for letting me know, Salvatore," she said finally, with a firm but cold voice. He nodded and stepped away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Maria Grazia looked at Antonella, who was asleep in the basket, oblivious to the whirlwind of emotions around her. How could Diego show up now just when she had found a new purpose in her life? The following days were marked by an invisible tension. Although she hadn't seen him in person, Maria Grazia knew Diego was nearby. Each step she took through the neighborhood felt accompanied by a shadow. Her heart raced at every corner, expecting him to appear before her at any moment. And then, one afternoon, while she was collecting recyclable materials on one of the more secluded streets, he appeared. "Maria Grazia." His voice echoed behind her, laden with a mix of regret and hesitation. She froze. Time seemed to stop at that moment. Slowly she turned to face him. Diego stood just a few meters away, with the same weary expression she had expected, but with something more in his eyes. Remorse. "What do you want?" Maria Grazia asked, her voice harsher than she intended. Diego hesitated, shoving his hands into his pockets and lowering his head. I heard about the girl, about Antonella," he said awkwardly. Maria Grazia felt a wave of anger rise within her. How dare he speak about Antonella? He who had abandoned her when she needed him most was now interested in the child she had taken in. "That's none of your business, Diego," she replied firmly. "You have no right to interfere in my life, not anymore." Diego looked up, hurt by her response. I know I was wrong, Maria Grazia." He took a step forward. "But I wanted to know if you're okay, if you need help." She let out a bitter laugh. "Now you want to know if I'm okay after all these years?" The pain she had buried for so long began to resurface. "I don't need you. I never did. I'm raising Antonella on my own, and I'm doing just fine." Diego fell silent, at a loss for words. What could he say? The wounds he had caused wouldn't heal so easily, and he knew that. "I just wanted—" He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I just wanted to know if there was anything I could do to help." Maria Grazia looked at him, her anger easing a bit, but not completely fading away. "The only thing you can do is leave me alone, Diego," she said, her voice firm but controlled. He nodded, accepting his sentence. Without another word, Diego turned and began to walk away, his figure slowly disappearing down the deserted street. The days passed slowly after the brief and painful reunion with Diego. Maria Grazia felt the weight of the past becoming lighter, but she knew that what mattered most now was Antonella's future. One morning, while Maria Grazia was finishing up a simple breakfast for herself and Antonella, A firm knock sounded at the door. Her heart raced immediately, a feeling that something was wrong. When she opened the door, she found a middle-aged woman in a formal suit, accompanied by a younger man holding a clipboard. "Good morning, ma'am," the woman said with a polite but formal smile. "I'm Clara, a social worker from the Child Welfare Department. This is my colleague, Roberto. We've received a report and would like to speak with you, if possible." Maria Grazia felt the ground shake beneath her feet. She looked at Antonella, who was innocently playing with an improvised toy, and then back at Clara. "A report?" Maria Grazia asked, trying to remain calm, but feeling anxiety rising. "About what?" Clara exchanged a quick glance with Roberto before responding. "We received a report that you are caring for a child, but do not have the necessary resources to ensure her well-being. We need to verify the conditions in which this child is living, and better understand the situation." Maria Grazia felt her heart tighten. The neighbors' gossip had finally reached its peak. The same people who had watched and whispered behind her back had now involved the authorities. She took a deep breath, trying to stay strong. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let Clara and Roberto enter. Maria Grazia's small house was modest, but clean and organized. She took pride in keeping everything in place, even with so few resources. Clara observed the surroundings carefully, her professional eyes catching every detail. Roberto took quick notes in silence as he followed the social worker. "This is Antonella," Maria Grazia said, her voice a bit shaky as she approached the girl, who looked curiously at the visitors. "I found her abandoned and decided to take care of her." Clara knelt beside Antonella, observing the little girl with a gentle gaze. She smiled at the child, who returned the gesture with a shy smile. "How old is she?" Clara asked, not taking her eyes off Antonella. "I'm not sure," Maria Grazia replied. "When I found her, there was a letter left by her mother, but not much information. By my calculations, she should be a little over a year old." Clara nodded as she stood up. "Understood. Have you managed to register custody of Antonella at any point?" The question made Maria Grazia feel even more vulnerable. She knew that without the proper documents, her situation was delicate. But until that moment, she hadn't considered the legal implications of caring for Antonella. She had simply followed her heart. "No," she replied, her voice low. "I couldn't. I didn't know what to do." Clara looked at her with understanding, but Maria Grazia knew that the social worker had a duty to fulfill, regardless of how she felt. "Mrs. Maria Grazia, I understand that your intentions are good," Clara began, her tone softer. "But without the proper documentation, we're dealing with a complicated situation. Moreover, we need to ensure that Antonella has access to medical care, education, and other resources that are essential for her development." "I'm taking care of her the best I can," Maria Grazia interrupted, feeling despair take over. "She has food, she has a roof, she has love. I didn't leave her behind like her mother did." Clara took a deep breath, feeling the pain in the elderly woman's words. "We're not saying that you're not doing your best," Clara tried to reassure her, "but there are legal issues involved, and it's our duty to ensure that Antonella is safe and has what she needs to grow up healthy." Maria Grazia looked at Antonella, who was now playing carefree. The very thought of losing the little girl made her chest ache. She didn't know how she would face that. To her, Antonella was her daughter, even if not by blood. And the idea that the authorities could take her away was unbearable. "Please don't take her away from me," Maria Grazia said, her voice breaking. "I am all she has. I swear I will do whatever it takes. If I need help, I'll accept it, but don't take her from me." Clara looked at Roberto, who was still taking notes, and then turned her attention back to Maria Grazia. "Here's what we'll do, Mrs. Maria Grazia," Clara began in a more conciliatory tone. "We will recommend support to ensure that Antonella has everything she needs. We won't make any decisions right now. We will work together to resolve this situation. I will need you to seek legal help to formalize the custody, and I will do what I can to assist with that process." Maria Grazia nodded, relieved to know that at least for now she wouldn't lose Antonella. Clara and Roberto prepared to leave, but before departing, Clara turned and said, "Remember, we're here to ensure the best for Antonella. If you need anything, I'll be nearby." As soon as the door closed, Maria Grazia collapsed into a chair, tears streaming silently down her face. The weeks following Clara's visit brought a whirlwind of emotions for Maria Grazia. The threat of losing Antonella loomed like a shadow over her life. Although the social worker had assured her that no immediate action would be taken, the fear of something happening continued to gnaw at Maria Grazia from within. She knew she needed to regularize the custody of the girl, but the process was confusing and complicated for someone like her, who had never dealt with such legal matters. One afternoon, while caring for Antonella, who was now taking her first steps in the small yard, Maria Grazia heard the phone ring. The old device, which she hardly ever used, was covered in dust, but the call felt urgent. She quickly picked it up, her heart racing. "Mrs. Maria Grazia?" It was Clara on the other end of the line. "I have news about the custody process for Antonella. I managed to schedule a meeting with a lawyer who can help you formalize the situation, but we need to act quickly. The authorities are starting to apply pressure." Panic surged up her spine. "Pressure? What does that mean? Are they going to take Antonella away from me?" Maria Grazia felt her throat tighten, as if the words could barely escape. Clara hesitated for a moment before responding gently. "We haven't reached that point yet, but we need to show that we are taking action. The lawyer I mentioned is experienced in cases like yours and can guide you. I'll send you the address so you can meet with him." Maria Grazia felt a momentary relief, but the fear still lingered. She hung up the phone and looked at Antonella, who was innocently playing with an improvised toy, unaware of the storm approaching. The little girl, with her bright eyes and easy smile, was now the center of Maria Grazia's world. The very thought of losing her made her heart ache in a way she hadn't thought possible. Days later, Maria Grazia met with the lawyer. The office was small but cozy, and the man who welcomed her, Vittorio, seemed understanding and experienced. He listened attentively as she explained how she had found Antonella, how she was taking care of the little girl, and how much it meant to her. "Mrs. Maria Grazia, I understand that you are in a difficult situation," Vittorio said, flipping through some papers she had brought. "The absence of formal custody documents is a serious issue, but not insurmountable. We need to regularize the situation as soon as possible to prevent the authorities from intervening negatively." Maria Grazia nodded, feeling the anguish tighten her chest again. "But what if I can't? What if they take her away?" The question came out laden with despair, and her eyes filled with tears. Vittorio paused for a moment and looked her in the eyes. "I'll be honest with you, Maria Grazia. If we don't do anything, the chances of Antonella being taken are real. However, if we act now and show that you are committed to following the legal procedures, we will have a strong argument to keep Antonella in your care. And of course, if there is any risk, we will fight with all our strength." Maria Grazia held back her tears, clinging to the only hope she had left. Vittorio began to guide her on the steps that needed to be taken: regular medical visits for Antonella, proof of income, testimonials from neighbors who could attest to her character and her ability to care for the girl. The following days were a whirlwind of appointments, all aimed at showing that Maria Grazia had the minimum conditions to ensure Antonella's well-being. Even with her limited resources, she worked hard to meet all the requirements. She took Antonella to the doctor, bought new clothes with her small savings, and even started talking to some neighbors to ensure they would speak in her favor, although most of them still looked at her with suspicion. Amidst all the chaos, Diego reappeared. He had tried to keep his distance after their last conversation, but upon learning that the authorities were involved, he decided to approach again. He came to Maria Grazia's house one afternoon when Antonella was napping. "Maria Grazia, can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She looked at him for a moment, feeling discomfort grow. She didn't want his presence, but she knew he wouldn't leave her in peace so easily. "What do you want, Diego? I've already told you I don't need you," Maria Grazia said, her voice firm, but her patience was limited. I heard about the situation with the authorities. I want to help." Diego looked at the ground as if carefully choosing his words. "I know I wasn't the best husband and that I left you at the worst time, but this is different. I don't want to see you lose Antonella. Maria Grazia crossed her arms, suspicious. And what do you think you can do for us? She asked coldly. Diego took a step forward, trying to appear sincere. I have contacts, Maria Grazia. I know people who can help us, who can speak on your behalf and speed up the custody process. I want to make things right. The idea of accepting Diego's help repulsed Maria Grazia. He had abandoned her when she needed him most, and now suddenly he wanted to be the hero of the story. But the desperation in her heart, the fear of losing Antonella, made her hesitate. I'll think about it, she said, not wanting to give more space to the conversation. Diego nodded and stepped back, but made it clear he was available if she needed him. Maria Grazia watched him walk away, feeling an internal conflict between her disgust for Diego and the desire to ensure Antonella stayed with her. Days later, the first hearing was scheduled. Clara would be present as a witness, and Antonella's future would be discussed. Maria Grazia knew this would be the most important moment of her life. The courtroom was filled with silence. The air felt dense, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the events to unfold. Maria Grazia sat next to Vittorio, the lawyer, with trembling hands in her lap. Across the room, Clara and a representative from the Child Welfare Department observed attentively. Antonella's future was about to be decided, and the weight of this reality was almost unbearable for Maria Grazia. The judge entered, and the session began. The first part of the hearing consisted of formal introductions, with Clara explaining Antonella's situation and the effort Maria Grazia had made to care for the little girl. Clara, to Maria Grazia's surprise, spoke favorably, highlighting the dedication the elderly woman had shown and her deep love for Antonella. I have no doubt that Maria Grazia provides Antonella with a loving home, Clara said, looking directly at the judge. However, we also know there are financial challenges and the absence of legal custody documentation, which brings us to this process. Vittorio then stood up, ready to defend his client. Your Honor, we are working to regularize the situation. My client, Maria Grazia, may not have all the financial resources she needs, but she has something that no institution can offer, the commitment to raise Antonella as if she were her daughter. There is no doubt that she loves this child and is willing to do whatever it takes to ensure her well-being. As Vittorio spoke, Maria Grazia looked at the door of the room, as if waiting for something bad to happen. And then it happened. The door slowly opened, and a man walked in. He was impeccably dressed, wearing a dark suit and exuding confidence. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor as he approached Clara's table and whispered something in her ear. Clara immediately looked up and whispered back, her face filled with surprise. Your Honor, Clara said, interrupting Vittorio, it seems we have new information that needs to be considered. This is Enzo Lombardi, and he claims to be Antonella's biological grandfather. Maria Grazia felt the blood drain from her face. Grandfather? How was that possible? She looked at Vittorio, who also seemed surprised, but tried to maintain his composure. What kind of new information is this? The judge asked, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through the papers in front of him. Enzo, the man who had just entered, took the floor. Your Honor, I am Enzo Lombardi, the father of Marina, Antonella's biological mother. He looked directly at Maria Grazia, who was stunned. I recently discovered about my granddaughter's existence, and I have come to claim her custody. The silence in the room was overwhelming. Maria Grazia felt her body tremble. How could there be a grandfather, a biological family, when Antonella had been abandoned? Antonella's mother never mentioned a father or any close relatives. Maria Grazia finally managed to speak, her voice trembling. All I know is that she was sick and left the child for me to care for. How can there be someone now after all this time? Enzo nodded, appearing sincere in his response. Marina never spoke of me because we had been estranged for years. When I found out about her illness, it was too late. She passed away before I could do anything. But now that I know about Antonella, I can't just stand by. She is my granddaughter, and I want to be part of her life. The judge looked at Clara, seeking confirmation. Mr. Enzo came to our department recently. after hiring a private detective to locate Antonella. We have evidence that he is indeed Marina's father, but we still need to verify all the information. Maria Grazia looked at Antonella, who was playing carefree in a corner of the room, unaware of the chaos surrounding her. Her heart ached. She knew that Enzo, with his resources and confident demeanor, could pose a real threat to her relationship with Antonella. I didn't know any of this, Maria Grazia stammered, her voice low. But Antonella is my daughter by heart. I've cared for her since I found her. It doesn't matter what biology says. She is mine. Enzo watched her for a moment, then turned to the judge. I'm not here to take Antonella from Maria Grazia, he said calmly. I want to be part of her life, yes, but I don't want to take her away from those who love her. I have resources, and I can ensure a safe future for my granddaughter. All I ask is to be present as a grandfather and help ensure that Antonella has what she needs. Those words, although reassuring, left Maria Grazia even more conflicted. On one hand, it was a relief to know that Enzo wasn't there to rip Antonella from her arms, but on the other hand, the idea of sharing custody of the little girl with a complete stranger terrified her. The judge paused, considering all the information. Mr. Lombardi, your entrance into this process is unexpected. We will need more time to analyze the evidence and determine what is best for Antonella. However, for now, we will not make any final decisions. Maria Grazia, the temporary custody of Antonella will remain with you while we continue the investigation, he said, looking directly at her. After the hearing, Maria Grazia left the courthouse with heavy steps, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Antonella, unaware of the turmoil, was in her arms, playing with a simple keychain. Enzo's presence had been an unexpected blow, and although he had not shown hostility, Maria Grazia could not fully trust his intentions. How could she? This man had appeared out of nowhere, claiming a connection to the girl who was now her daughter, in every sense but blood. On the way home, Maria Grazia walked in silence, reflecting on everything that had happened. Her thoughts were in disarray, and the fear of losing Antonella consumed her. She didn't know if she had the strength to face a new challenge, especially with someone as powerful and influential as Enzo. Upon arriving home, she found an envelope under the door. It was a letter from Enzo, asking to meet her the next day at a local cafe. He wanted to talk without lawyers or courts, just the two of them. The next day, Maria Grazia accepted the invitation. She needed to understand what Enzo really wanted. Antonella stayed with Clara, who had become an important ally in the fight for custody, while Maria Grazia went to the meeting. The cafe was small and discreet, away from the city center. When she arrived, Enzo was already sitting, dressed casually, a stark contrast to the rigid demeanor he had shown in court. He stood up when he saw her enter and greeted her with a nod. "Thank you for coming, Maria Grazia," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. She sat down, keeping a cautious gaze. "I'm here because I want to understand what you really want, Enzo," Maria Grazia began straightforwardly. "You appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be Antonella's grandfather, and now you want to be part of her life. But what does that really mean?" Enzo took a deep breath, seeming thoughtful for a moment before responding. "I understand your suspicion," he said calmly. "I would be suspicious too in your place. The truth is, until recently, I didn't know about Antonella's existence. My daughter Marina and I had been estranged, and I only learned about her illness and my granddaughter when it was too late." Maria Grazia kept her gaze fixed, trying to read the intentions behind his words. "But why now?" she asked. "Why show up now when Antonella is already in my care? She is happy with me, and I'm taking care of her with all the love I can offer." Enzo nodded, as if he were weighing each word before responding. "I don't want to take Antonella away from you, Maria Grazia," he said sincerely. "In fact, I admire what you've done. Adopting a child, especially under your circumstances, is an act of love and courage. But I am her grandfather, and I also have responsibilities. I have resources, connections, and I can ensure that Antonella has a safe future. I don't want to replace you. I just want to be present as a grandfather." Maria Grazia fell silent, her hands gripping the fabric of her skirt as she tried to absorb what he was saying. "And what exactly do you propose?" she asked, her voice softer, still filled with uncertainty. Enzo leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I propose a partnership, Maria Grazia," he said with a sincere tone. "You continue taking care of Antonella, being her mother, as you've always done. I won't interfere with that, but at the same time, I would like to be part of her life. I want her to know that she has a larger family, that she has a grandfather who can support her when needed. Moreover, I can help you. I know the financial situation isn't easy, and I want Antonella to have what she deserves." Maria Grazia looked at him bewildered. It was a generous offer, but she knew that accepting meant allowing Enzo to enter their lives, and that made her uncomfortable. "I don't need charity," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Antonella is happy with the little we have. I don't want her to feel torn between two worlds." Enzo shook his head. "It's not charity, Maria Grazia," he corrected gently. "It's a way to ensure that Antonella has the best of both worlds. You're already doing an amazing job caring for her, but I can help make things easier. I want her to have opportunities that you might not be able to provide on your own, and I want to do this without taking away what you've already built with her." Maria Grazia felt the weight of the offer. On one hand, accepting Enzo's help meant securing a more stable future for Antonella. On the other hand, she feared it would create an emotional distance between her and the little girl. "And what if she becomes closer to you than to me?" Maria Grazia asked, her voice finally revealing the vulnerability she felt. "What if she forgets me?" Enzo sighed, looking directly at her. "That will never happen," he said firmly. "The bond you have built with Antonella is unbreakable. I'm not here to replace you. I'm here to add something to her life, not to take your place." Maria Grazia remained silent for a long time. She thought about Antonella, the smiling girl she had taken in without hesitation, and the uncertain future that now awaited them. Enzo seemed sincere, and his offer was tempting, but Maria Grazia knew that the decision needed to be made carefully. Finally, she lifted her eyes and replied, "I accept your help, Enzo," she said, her voice firm but full of emotion, "but with one condition. You will not interfere with how I take care of Antonella. She is my daughter in heart, and nothing will change that." Enzo smiled, relieved. "I agree, Maria Grazia," he said with a respectful tone. "Let's work together to ensure that Antonella has everything she needs. I won't interfere. I'll be here as support, not as a threat." The days following the agreement between Maria Grazia and Enzo brought a mix of relief and apprehension. Their interactions were initially cautious. Enzo visited Maria Grazia's home regularly, always bringing something for Antonella: children's books, simple toys, or sometimes even a treat. The little girl, curious by nature, gradually began to warm up to him with that innocent trust that only children possess. For Maria Grazia, each interaction between them was proof that her fear of losing the bond between them was strong, unshakable, and Antonella made that clear every time she ran into Maria Grazia's arms at the end of each visit from Enzo. "She likes you, Maria Grazia," Enzo commented one afternoon while watching Antonella play in the yard. "You are her mother, that's clear, and I respect that." Maria Grazia looked at him, relieved but still cautious. "That's all I want, Enzo. For her to know that, no matter what happens, I will always be here for her," she replied, her voice soft but firm. Enzo nodded, showing that he understood the depth of the connection between Maria Grazia and Antonella. It was clear to him that there was no replacing the place Maria Grazia occupied in the girl's heart. He wanted to be a present grandfather, but never a competitor. As time went on, Antonella began to refer to Enzo as nonno, grandfather. The word rolled off her tongue naturally, and when he heard it for the first time, Enzo was almost moved to tears. For him, that word meant that, in some way, he had found a place in the girl's life. Maria Grazia, on the other hand, watched the moment with mixed feelings, but she allowed herself to relax, understanding that Antonella still ran to her arms for comfort and affection. "She's happy, Maria Grazia," Enzo said, smiling as he watched Antonella flip through one of the books he had brought, "and that's all that matters." Life continued with this new dynamic. Enzo helped financially, ensuring that Antonella had access to doctors, clothes, and a proper education. Despite her initial distrust, Maria Grazia began to realize that Enzo was genuinely committed to being part of his granddaughter's life, without interfering in her upbringing. He respected the boundaries that Maria Grazia had set, and gradually the two began to understand each other. However, not everything was as peaceful as it seemed. Diego, Maria Grazia's ex-husband, learned about Enzo's presence and the changes in the life of the woman he had abandoned. Driven by a mix of curiosity and resentment, Diego began to lurk around Maria Grazia's house more frequently. Although he didn't approach directly, his presence was felt, like a shadow from the past that Maria Grazia preferred to forget. One night, while Antonella slept peacefully, Maria Grazia went out to the porch to breathe in the fresh night air. To her surprise, she found Diego standing on the corner, watching the house from afar. "What are you doing here, Diego?" she asked, her voice firm and filled with disdain. He hesitated before answering, as if struggling to find the right words. I heard about what's happening. About Enzo, about Antonella," he began, his voice low. "And I wanted to know how you are." Maria Grazia let out a bitter laugh. "You want to know how I am? After all these years? After everything you did?" She shook her head, incredulous. "I don't need you, Diego. Antonella is my daughter now, and we're fine without you." Diego took a step forward, trying to get closer. "I know I was wrong, Maria Grazia," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "but I don't want to lose the little I have left. Maybe I can help." Maria Grazia crossed her arms, feeling a growing anger. "Help?" she repeated incredulously. "You had your chance, Diego, and you threw it away. I don't need you, and Antonella certainly doesn't." Diego lowered his head, defeated. "I just wanted to make things right," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Maria Grazia watched him for a moment, her anger still present but mixed with a sense of pity. "You made your choices, Diego, and I made mine. Now go away. There's nothing left for you here." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the regret of years of mistakes and poor decisions. Without another word, Diego turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Maria Grazia stood there, feeling the weight of that encounter, but also a sense of relief. The past was finally being left behind. The next day, Maria Grazia and Antonella joined Enzo for a walk in the park. The sun was shining brightly, and Antonella was joyfully running between the trees, laughing with the innocence of a child who has no worries in the world. "She is a special girl," Enzo said, watching the scene with a smile. Maria Grazia agreed. "Yes, she is," she said, looking at Antonella with tenderness. "And no matter what the future brings, we will make sure she stays this way, happy and loved." As she watched Antonella play, Maria Grazia felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Despite all the challenges, she had found a new family. Antonella had a home, a loving grandfather, and Maria Grazia finally allowed herself to believe that the future would be kinder than the past. As the months went by, the lives of Maria Grazia, Antonella and Enzo found a new normal. The bond between them grew stronger, and the little girl was surrounded by love and security. Maria Grazia, though always cautious, began to realize that with Enzo's help, Antonella would have opportunities that she could never provide on her own. But that didn't mean she would stop being the mother the girl needed. Her constant presence, care, and dedication never wavered. Doctor visits became regular. Antonella started attending a nearby daycare, and the resources Enzo provided allowed the girl to have everything a child her age needed to grow happy and healthy. Maria Grazia continued her work in recycling and crafts, always finding time to be with Antonella, whether helping with schoolwork or simply telling stories before bed. One day, while they were walking through the town square, Antonella asked Maria Grazia an unexpected question. "Mommy, do you think I can be anything when I grow up?" Maria Grazia looked at the girl, surprised by the depth of the question, especially for someone so young. She smiled, her eyes misting with emotion. "Yes, Antonella," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "You can be anything you want, and I will always be here to support you." Antonella smiled back, pleased with the answer, and went back to running around the park, exploring every corner as if it were a new world. Enzo, who was sitting next to Maria Grazia, also smiled, watching the girl with tenderness. "She's lucky to have you," he commented, looking at Maria Grazia with admiration. "We're lucky to have her," Maria Grazia replied, her tone filled with gratitude. "She changed my life, Enzo. At first I was lost, but now I feel like I've found a purpose." Enzo nodded, fully understanding what Maria Grazia meant. For him, Antonella had also been an unexpected blessing, a second chance to build something he never had with his daughter, Marina. However, as life stabilized, there was still one last pending issue, the final hearing regarding Antonella's custody. Although Maria Grazia had temporary custody, the judge still needed to make a definitive decision. The support from Enzo, the financial help, and the good relationship between the two counted in her favor. But Maria Grazia knew that the system was unpredictable, and the ghost of Diego, still occasionally lurking, added another layer of uncertainty to the situation. When the day of the final hearing arrived, Maria Grazia was more nervous than she had ever been. She and Enzo sat side by side in the courtroom, waiting for the judge's decision. Vittorio, the lawyer, had presented a strong case arguing that Antonella was being cared for with love and dedication, that she had a safe home, and that her education and health were assured. To Maria Grazia's relief, Diego did not show up. It seemed he had finally understood that his place in their lives had disappeared. The judge flipped through the papers in front of him, carefully analyzing every detail. After a few moments of silence that felt like an eternity, he finally looked up. "After reviewing all the documents and considering the involved witnesses, I have reached a decision," the judge announced, in a serious yet calm tone. "The legal custody of Antonella will remain with Maria Grazia, who has proven to be the best caregiver for the girl. However, we recognize Mr. Enzo Lombardi's role as a grandfather and financial supporter, and his presence will be encouraged in the upbringing of Antonella." Maria Grazia felt a wave of relief wash over her. Tears began to stream down her face as she looked at Enzo, who was also smiling, clearly relieved by the decision. "Thank you very much, Your Honor," Maria Grazia said, her voice choked with emotion. The judge nodded. "I certify that this child will be well cared for," he said with a slight smile, "and that above all she will be surrounded by love." As they left the courtroom, Maria Grazia hugged Antonella tightly, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The future, which had once seemed uncertain and full of obstacles, now appeared clearer. Antonella was her daughter, in heart and soul, and nothing could change that. "Let's go home, Piccola," she whispered in Antonella's ear, who smiled and nodded. The following months were peaceful. Antonella continued to grow, becoming more curious and full of energy each day. Maria Grazia and Enzo, now with a relationship built on respect and cooperation, worked together to ensure that the little girl had everything she needed. Enzo's support was essential, but Maria Grazia's love was what truly guided Antonella on her path. One day at the end of a summer afternoon, as the sun set on the horizon, Maria Grazia watched Antonella play in the yard. Enzo was beside her, and they both contemplated the simple joy of the little girl. "I think everything turned out well in the end," Enzo said with a light smile. Maria Grazia nodded, her eyes filled with tenderness. "Yes," she replied, her heart at peace. "Everything turned out well. Antonella found her family, and so did I." And so, under a sky painted orange and pink, Antonella ran freely, surrounded by a love that protected and guided her, ready to face the world, knowing she would never be alone. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to be the first to receive the next video. Share it with your friends and check out the video on the end screen. You're going to be moved.